Excuse me. Hello. Thanks everybody for coming. Got a pretty good crowd tonight. This is our privilege to present a couple of documentary projects that we've been working on for the last few months. We've had a lot of help from people in the community and also from the Retro Local Initiative, which was offered up by the PBS network through their current program, Retro Report. And Retro Report airs on Mondays and Tuesdays, prime time, so if you guys want to catch it, that's where you can. But what it focuses on is making connections between historic events, historic happenings, and the current political landscape, basically. It sort of looks at the roots of what led us to the current situations that we face on a wide variety of fronts. About 8 months ago or so, we were asked to apply for that, and we took kind of a look through our notes about what kind of formative events in Humboldt County we could tackle to sort of demonstrate what our history has been and where we're going and how the two intersect. And because we knew that the Wiyot tribe was in the process of getting the island back through the city of Eureka, yeah, that's worthy of applause for sure. That was an easy choice for us, and I think we're happy with the product, and I hope you will be too. The other one was a little bit more complicated for us, but it's on a similar vein. It involved the Chinese exclusion of the 1880s. Both of those events are formative for Eureka, and not in a good way, obviously. So both films kind of charted this journey that Eureka has taken in trying to address those issues of the past and make good on them as much as is possible. And so that's what the films do. With the Chinese exclusion one, we start with Chinese exclusion, but then we go into sort of the plight of the immigrant, and we we follow Central del Pueblo through their efforts to pass the Sanctuary Initiative in 2018. Yes, that's another one. And we're lucky to have representatives from Central del Pueblo with us tonight. They'll be on the panel. So hopefully we'll all get to learn something. We're going to show the two videos. They're relatively short. They're less than 10 minutes apiece. And we're going to start actually with a short documentary that's of the Retro Report approach, that is sort of a generalized view of what they do. So we'll show that first. It's short. And then we'll show the two, back-to-back, the two films that we made. After that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll get our panelists on the stage here, hopefully with no accidents. Yeah, it's kind of a steep set of stairs. And then we'll have a panel discussion, and then after that, we'll open it up to comments and questions from the audience. It's been a privilege to work on these two projects. I've been a journalist in Humboldt County a long time, and these are two things that have always struck me as needing more discussion. Yeah. I'm James Falk, by the way. Yes, thanks. I forgot that part. Yes, I'm James. And by the way, there's meatballs. So the meatballs are over there. The coffee's done, and there's cookies and whatnot. So I think we're go ahead and ready to start the rolling on the first one. Now, like I said, this will be a generic look at what Retro Report is. It's on a topic, immigration, I believe, but it's not centered here. And then after that, we'll immediately roll into the two local films. So hit it.
I'm Celeste Headley.
And I'm Masood Olufani. This is Retro Report on PBS.
They'll stun the world. Not unusual.
Secrets exposed.
Perhaps no issue highlights the divisions of the Trump era more than immigration. Whether it's the fight over building a border wall, policies that separate migrant children from their parents, or the harsh rhetoric coming from the president.
But while it might seem new, That rhetoric contains echoes of another anti-immigration backlash from 25 years ago.
Our country is out of control. People are pouring across the southern border.
Indiscriminate floods of illegals across our borders.
Day one of my presidency, they're getting out.
Deport every illegal alien in the United States immediately.
I will build a security fence, and we will seal the border of this country.
I was badly criticized for using the word invasion. It's an invasion.
The 1990s were a time of building anger over immigration. And it started in a place that might surprise you, California.
Illegal immigration is a serious problem in California.
Undocumented immigrants coming across the border were concerning to Peter Nunez, a former federal prosecutor who lived in San Diego.
Every night, the groups would gather on the Mexican side, waiting for the sun to go down. And they would gather by the hundreds, if not the thousands. And at a certain point, the groups would just sort of charge across the border.
It's been dubbed the Bonsai Dash. Human waves overwhelm border guards and race into California.
The number of Border Patrol agents was totally inadequate, so it was totally out of control.
California was in the middle of a recession, and while the downturn was primarily from the loss of manufacturing jobs, immigrants quickly got the blame.
Groups worried and angry about the impact of rampant immigration are multiplying.
People are losing their jobs left and right, and they felt this was because of the influx of illegals coming in taking their jobs.
Robert Kiley was a political consultant. He and his wife started working with grassroots citizens groups who were angry that undocumented immigrants were using taxpayer-funded social services.
When you went to the hospital, to the emergency, they were full of people there that weren't from this country. They were illegals. They were getting medical services free. Schools were being impacted. Cities were being impacted.
The Kileys helped come up with Proposition 187, a ballot initiative that would deny government benefits to undocumented immigrants. Peter Nunez became an early supporter.
The idea was, let's make California an unfriendly place for people who are here illegally, with hope that no more would come and that those that were here would leave.
Their children would be kicked out of public schools. Educators and healthcare workers would be required to report anyone they suspect of being illegal.
It was considered an extreme idea by Democrats and some Republicans who said it would unfairly target immigrants for the state's economic trouble.
The immigrants that were coming here were doing jobs that nobody wanted to do. They were farm workers, they were people who were janitors, they were maids.
Opponents labeled Proposition 187 immoral and racist.
Taking innocent children and throwing them out on the streets, that somehow is going to solve our illegal immigration problem, is simply fallacious.
People thought it wasn't really going to have much of a chance. But it turned out it hit a nerve.
More than 600,000 Californians have signed petitions calling for a halt to services illegal residents receive.
And then it got picked up by the politicians.
Republican Governor Pete Wilson, who was in a tight race for re-election, threw his campaign behind Prop 187.
Governor Pete Wilson asking the state with the highest unemployment to give him a second term. Wilson says, don't blame him, blame illegal immigrants.
The federal government won't stop them at the border, yet requires us to pay billions to take care of them.
Wilson's campaign ad felt like a personal attack to Kevin De Leon, even though he was a citizen. His mother had come to California illegally before becoming a legal resident.
It was something that was deeply personal because I witnessed my mother, I witnessed my aunts who worked their fingers to the bone, who helped build this economy.
For Hispanics, the largest immigrant group in the state, it has become a highly emotional issue.
That politicians were scapegoating, demonizing, looking for someone to blame. That's not the America that I know.
De Leon didn't have much experience in politics, but he helped organize anti-Prop 187 marches.
And they all brought Mexican flags. And boy, that ticked off a lot of people. That polarized the issue. Polarized it. Are you for it or against it?
The tensions just hit a fever pitch. As a young Latino, I felt unease, I think for the first time in my own city, my own country, my own state where I'd grown up.
Yes, 187! Time to get out, stop
Prop 187 was an expression of unhappiness with a community that was rapidly becoming less and less white. There was a kind of anxiety, anger, rejection out there in the country.
Proposition 187 and Pete Wilson won in a landslide, but the courts ruled that only the federal government can regulate immigration, and Prop 187 never went into effect.
What happened almost immediately after is a surge of citizenship applications and of people saying they were going to vote. 1 million new registered voters who were Latino in California.
I thought for the very first time, perhaps we have to run for office. Enough with the demonization, enough with the scapegoating. We want to be full-fledged Americans. We want to have our voices heard. We want to have a say.
Kevin De Leon did run for office, and 20 years after Prop 187, he became the first Latino president of the state Senate in more than a century.
My story should not be the exception. My story should be the rule.
Before leaving office in 2018, he and other Latino politicians helped make California one of the most liberal and immigrant-friendly states in the country, a change fueled by a long-term demographic shift in the state.
It's not just the rise of the Latino vote that has turned California so blue. From the mid-1990s up until the early part of this decade, there's a mass exodus of white working-class voters. They went to surrounding states. They were being replaced by younger, poor immigrant voters. And that combined, that mix, has what has made California the bluest state in the union.
But Proposition 187 had an impact beyond California. Even though it never went into effect, it added fuel to an immigration crackdown that spread across the country in the mid-90s.
It was Prop 187 that began the anti-immigration fever, a fever which has now spread to Washington.
Immigration went to the top of the agenda. The Clinton administration started ratcheting up immigration enforcement efforts because they were scared to death of what Prop 187 symbolized.
Calls for additional border barriers, expedited deportations, and for local police to enforce immigration law started to grow. And it was a Democrat who signed those ideas into law.
That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more, by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before.
It was a really fundamental change in the way the federal government goes about enforcing immigration policy, and created the basis for the large-scale removals that we've experienced in this country.
We'll build the wall, but who's going to pay for the wall? Who?
Since the 2016 election, immigration has divided much of the country, and there were echoes of Proposition 187 from the anger to the rhetoric.
They come over to the border. They have the baby in the United States. We now take care of that baby, Social Security, Medicare, education. Give me a break.
It's this mix of economic insecurity combined with dramatic changes in our demography. We're seeing the story replay itself.
Today, the Trump administration is taking a harsher approach to immigration.
President Trump has decided to slash the U.S. refugee program almost in half.
New policies have expanded the categories for immigrants targeted for deportation. They've also made it harder to apply for asylum and enacted aggressive family detention policies at the border.
Lawyers say hundreds of migrant children were forced to sleep on the floor for weeks without enough food.
But California's experience in the years since Proposition 187 suggests that it's hard to predict what the current crackdown will lead to.
You're not going to realize what seeds were being planted. It's never a simple story of a melting pot, and it's not a simple story of their taking over. It's this constant struggle between feelings of being threatened and trying to create a larger community. And I think 187 was a signpost on that.
Migrant people come to this country to seek an American dream. Regardless of what country you come from, we come to this country because It's seen as this land of opportunity.
In two contrasting narratives, one from 1885 and another from 2018, Humboldt County's transformation from an insular community wrought by economic anxieties and racism into one declaring itself a sanctuary for immigrants and refugees is made plain.
It was February 1885, and Lunar New Year was coming. There were about 200 to 300 Chinese people, mostly living in one confined square block in downtown Eureka. The Chinese were concerned because they knew that Chinese gamblers were going to come up from San Francisco for Lunar New Year's and cause trouble. The Chinese community, the merchants, go to the police and they say, we want protection against the violence that could well come, and the police ignore them. There's a shootout in Eureka between two groups of Chinese men, and a Eureka City councilman, David Kendall, is killed. And within an hour, there's 600 white men coming in from the woods, coming off the fishing boats, and gathering in Centennial Hall in downtown Eureka.
The angry crowd voted to evict the Chinese from their homes and businesses. A posse was quickly dispatched while police stood by and did little to keep order. The vigilantes seized Chinese property and herded their prisoners to the waterfront, where they were soon to begin their exile.
Because the Chinese are visibly different, they are targeted, they are marked, and they are purged.
What happened in Humboldt County, by its scale and by its method, became, I think, a sort of bellwether for how other places could react and get away with it and do something. It even became known as the Eureka method. You would intimidate the Chinese people. Law enforcement would stand back and not protect the rights of the Chinese. They would try to protect their lives, prevent Chinese from being lynched and killed, but they would encourage the Chinese to leave, and in fact sometimes help them to leave the area.
Another similar incident occurred in 1906, when Chinese workers were brought in by businessmen to staff a local salmon cannery. White workers again erupted, forcing another Chinese removal and doubling down on a growing reputation for intolerance. For years, Humboldt County's infamous reputation kept Chinese workers and families out of the area. One Chinese woman, however, never let the history or lopsided demographics curb her ambitions. Betty Quan-Chin was born in China. She spent her childhood homeless, without food or family, toiling in hard labor camps. She was eventually able to walk hundreds of miles out of her rural village and swim her way to Hong Kong and a new life. She soon came to join her sisters in America, a nation, she says, provided her with freedom and opportunity. Humboldt County has become her home. She's heard the stories about what happened to the Chinese in Humboldt, and though she's experienced some racism herself, she hasn't let that or the history of Eureka deter her from making the community better.
But I can do something in my community, show the people we are not the bad people. We can contribute this society, this community.
Her Betty Quan-Chin Center in Eureka has served thousands of meals and saved hundreds of families from the desperation of homelessness, hunger, and addiction. Humboldt County and the world have taken notice. In 2008, she earned the Minerva Award from former California First Lady Maria Shriver for her work to lift up the homeless and feed the hungry. In 2010, President Barack Obama gave her the Presidential Citizens Medal.
We all had a story to tell.
Yet in recent years, for many new immigrants in Humboldt, the situation remained volatile.
Fortuna 2017, we don't forget. Families were terrorized and they are terrified still.
In 2017, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducted a series of raids in Fortuna, California, a few miles south of Eureka. Out of that disruption and trauma, a community group, Central del Pueblo, formed to advocate for immigrants.
Every time we heard of ICE being in town or raids happening, I feared that I'd come home to no mother, or if I even got to go home.
So what we do in Centro is to try to come together, empower, spread the rights we have as immigrants here.
As many segments of the U.S. population rail against the perceived threat of immigration, immigrants and their allies in Humboldt County sought and obtained enough signatures to get a sanctuary initiative on the ballot for November 2018. It passed. For those struggling to find and secure a home here, it was a landmark moment.
The vote for me, that sanctuary passing here, was a bigger sign for me that we can do changes here. And from here, to a national level.
These immigrants, like Betty Chen, have decided to assert themselves in the face of demonization and fear. By actively working to improve their adopted communities, they've distinguished themselves as contributors, reformers, and activists who want to improve the world.
All people contribute this country. That's what makes America so beautiful.
We like to be happy, like everybody, I think. But with this little detail that we are far from home, this is not our language, this is a very different culture, and even though we want to make this place a better place.
We got one more coming here. There's a little bit of a delay. We're trying to see if we can do something about. Sorry about that. No, they're not ventriloquists. That was a problem on our end.
If it were not for that baby found on the island, we today, as we know ourselves, wouldn't be here.
When the whites first came into Humboldt County in 1850, California wasn't even a state yet. That happened later in the year. There was no infrastructure up here. There was no law enforcement. You had people coming up here who took advantage of that. The predators who always come, and I think other people who maybe wouldn't normally have done things the way they did, but they found it very easy to do so. A group formed in the Hydesville area, which is about 20 miles in from the coast and about 20 miles southeast of Eureka, and they formed a volunteer unit. They called themselves the Humboldt Cavalry, and they went out, rode around, and killed some Indians, and then they asked the governor to make them official as a part of the state militia, because if he did that, they'd get paid, and they'd get paid a lot. But the governor wasn't doing that. So a group of these people, including the members of the Humboldt Cavalry and ranchers who were upset and other people who wanted more power, planned a series of attacks against the most vulnerable Indians they could find, which were the Wiots.
There was between 3,000 and 5,000 Wiot people living all over. We went down to Bear River, we went up to Little River, out to Chalk Mountain, to Berry Summit. That was our domain.
And so starting in late February 1860, they launched a series of attacks where at least a dozen Wiyot villages were attacked at night, and as many of the Indians as possible killed and the villages burned. And the one that we know the most about, and that's always been publicized, was the one on Indian Island, the Dulawat village. It appears to me that probably more than half of the Wiyots were killed.
On the night of the Indian Island attack, the Wiyot tribe was in the midst of its World Renewal Ceremony, an annual event that balanced out the competing forces of the universe and ensured humanity's well-being on Earth.
There was a baby, which was my great-grandfather, and there was 2 toddlers or 2 young children, and there was a couple of young teenagers that survived that night on the island. And an old woman who was quagmired in the mud. When the citizens of Eureka came out, she was singing a song. And so we come to understand the song probably was a song of mourning, mourning the death of everyone there. It was a really sad event. We lost everything, the land, which we knew was ours, and then they brought us to Fort Humboldt in deplorable conditions. Then they moved us to Smith River. We came home. They moved us to Hoopa area. We came home. Then they thought they would take us hours and hours away down to Covelo, Round Valley. But we were like salmon. We come home.
Through years of perseverance and hard work, a portion of the island was returned to the tribe in 2004.
City of Eureka and Table Bluff Reservation Wiyot Tribe in commemoration of the Indian Island 40-acre land transfer, June 25, 2004.
After years of industrial pollution and misuse, however, it took the tribe 10 years to clean the island up enough to hold another world renewal ceremony. Yet the tribe could not rest until the bulk of the island was returned to Wiyot hands, and the dance could be held again on an ongoing and regular basis.
Shortly after my election, I went to a Wiyot Tribal Council meeting. I asked them, the tribal council members at the time, if there was anything that Eureka could do as a city to improve the relationship with the Wiyot tribe. The very first thing that everyone said was, we would like the remainder of Indian Island that belongs to the tribe to be returned.
In December 2018, the Eureka City Council took the historic vote to return the island, minus a few privately owned parcels, back to the tribe.
This is something hard for me to do tonight. Hearing the stories from our elders that talk about the island, to talk about the massacre, to talk about how it was taken from us, to see today you as a council doing the right thing and returning it back to us, that's a tremendous thing.
On the 21st of October 2019, the ceremony to formally return the remainder of the city-owned portion of the island to the tribe was held on the Eureka waterfront. Hundreds attended, and festivities featured a long-sought apology from current and former city leaders for the 1860 attacks.
As a former mayor of Eureka and on behalf of the City Council and the people of Eureka, we would like to offer a formal apology to the Wiyot people for the actions of our people in 1860. Nothing that we say or do can make up for what occurred on that night. It will forever be a scar on our history. We can, however, with the present and future actions of support for the Wiyot people, work to remove the prejudice and bigotry that still exist in our society today.
Though details on future plans are few, the returning of the land has opened up an opportunity in Humboldt County for healing and renewal. Its impact, tribal members believe, will transcend racial divisions.
After the dance of March of 2014, this lady came up to me and she says, "You're Cheryl, right?" And I said, "Yes." "I want you to know I was out there on the island when you had your first day of dancing. I felt the most I've ever felt alive and accepted in this community, because the ceremony is not just for the Wiyot people. The ceremony is for everyone."
Nahi nahi noa, nahi nahi noa, nahi nahi noa, eh noa, eh noa.
By acknowledging and addressing crimes of history, city leaders hope to learn the difficult lessons of the past and provide a new example of how community spirit should be exemplified.
I think understanding the history of the place and how, people's impact has changed over time and how people have connected differently or not connected is critically important.
We're always searching for the truth, and in cases like this, the truth has been very hard to find. The whites wanted to suppress the truth. They wanted to ignore what really happened.
What that is now is water under the bridge. It has gone out to sea, and it's gone. No, you don't forget. You forgive, and you still love that person. May not like what you do today, but maybe tomorrow will be different.
Thanks for watching that. And thanks to all the interviewees who participated. It was an enlightening experience, to say the least. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a sort of community discussion about this. We're going to have panelists come up on stage, and so to do that, we're going to take a short break. There's food over there, meatballs, as I said before. There's coffee and whatnot. It's really important that we have. So as part of this whole arrangement, we got a grant to make these two films, and one of the requirements of the grant is that we have an audience like yourself take the time to fill out surveys that say what you thought of the project and the documentary and suggestions for future things and that sort of thing. So please, if you can, we'd really, really appreciate it if you could fill those out. The people with the stylish blue KEET hats can help you get one of those, and there's pencils and whatnot over there. And so we'll adjourn for about 5 minutes, reset the stage, and then we'll come back for interviews and then a question and answer with the audience. So thank you.
escríbeme, me hace más falta tu.
Got to clean up the from that. I can't pronounce it. Spartana.
All right, welcome to the second half. We've got 6 panelists here with us today, and they represent various stakeholders in the 2 films that we just screened. And I think we're very privileged to have them with us tonight. So I'm just going to go down the line and have each of the guests introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. So let's start with you, Jerry.
Yeah, I'm Jerry Rohde, and I'm a local historian. I've done that for about 30 years. And as you can tell from the programs that I was in, I really need sunglasses when I'm being interviewed outside.
Yeah, he was in both films. He is the star here.
Yeah.
Okay, Brenda, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Brenda Perez. I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and I am a member of Centro del Pueblo, a local grassroots that empowers the immigrant community.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cheryl Seidner. I'm from the Wiyot tribe, cultural liaison currently, and fabulously retired.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Bergell, City Council Member, Ward 5. Grateful to be here.
Hey, young everyone. Kutcher Risling-Baldi Ahoyet. I am Dr. Kutcher Risling-Baldi. I'm the Department Chair of Native American Studies and enrolled in the Hoopa Valley Tribe, but also Yurok and Karuk.
Hi, I'm Betty Chin. I am homeless outreach advocate.
And so much more.
Dr. Risling-Baldi, I dropped the doctor on your title, so I apologize for that.
I can't fix anybody's anything, like if something's broken or whatever, but I can philosophically tell you why that's not a good thing.
So I have a bunch of questions, and we're just going to kind of bounce around a little bit. At the end of this, we'll open it up for questions and comments from the audience, which I think will probably prove the most informative. At least that's my hope. First off, I want to start with Cheryl. I think that you've become sort of a stalwart in the community, representing your tribe and a greater sense of grace for your own perspective in the face of the things that happened to the tribe historically. I think you, in the film, you've talked about forgiveness, and you talk about that a lot. In the community, there's been so much pain in this country over the generations with episodes of Native genocide having occurred repeatedly. What can you say to those who are not yet willing to forgive, at least not until more is achieved to make amends for the damage done?
Repeat the last part of that.
Well, basically, there are people who are not yet ready to forgive, people who have lost a lot culturally and historically. And what do you say to those people who feel like efforts haven't been sufficient to make up for the things that were done and taken?
I can only speak from my own background and speak of my parents, Bill and Loretta Seidner. Everyone was welcomed at our home, and especially at dinner time, people always came and showed up for dinner. And Mom and Dad, Dad was a logger, he felled trees. Mother was a filleter and filleted fish, and that's what they did. She stood up 8 hours a day in a cold, wet building, and Dad, unfortunately, he lost his life to his profession as a logger. But they're the ones that told me what happened in 1860 happened in 1860. You leave it there. You don't carry it around with you. And she didn't say, she meaning my mom, didn't say forgiveness, but she said
those people are the ones that need to pay for it. The people of your generation, people of today, did not have a hand in what happened. And so I'm the one that was trying to learn how to forgive. But a thing that the last thing I saw my father do when I was 16 years old, a few weeks before he was killed, someone came up to him and just berated him and said every awful thing you can say to someone. And it really made my mother angry. Dad, and he came back into the house. I wasn't there at that time. But in about a week or so, that gentleman came back and wanting money. And Dad went out to see him, and he wanted money. Dad took out his pocketbook. Who knows how much money it was that he gave the man. I was there at that time, and my mother was irate. But when Dad came in, she didn't get all, she says, "What did you do that for?" And he looked at her and he said, "He needed it more than we did." And that was the last act I saw of my father. And I look at that as forgiveness. And what happened, happened, and you got to move on. You can't get stuck there. And so being forgiving of someone, I told a young person one time who did the same thing he did, that man did to my dad, he did to me. And one day he came and he apologized. I says, "Well, gee whiz, this is your third or fourth apology. I don't know whether you mean it. But I says, I'll tell you this, I will always love you. That is a given. I don't like what you do, but I will always love you." And he didn't know. And just this past June, he came up and asked for forgiveness again. And I says, it is, like the video said, it's water under the bridge. You gotta let it go. I've let it go. You've got to let it go. So it's a two-way street of forgiveness. I can forgive, you can forgive. The other person has to learn to receive it. And if they're not willing to receive it, it's not their time yet. So maybe later down the road. And when I've apologized for something I've done and the person doesn't accept it, I let it go for a little while, and I come back in a few days, a few weeks. I put the apology out there. And if it doesn't get accepted, okay, Mama says you got to do it 3 times. And so I went back, and it was about another several months had gone by, and I finally went up to her and I said, I just wanted to say I apologize for my actions. I did not have all the information in my hand when I made that comment, that statement, that decision. And she still never accepted it until 2 years ago. And this has been going on for 20 years. And she came in, and she didn't say anything, but she came and asked me how I was doing. She started the conversation. So forgiveness is 2 ways. You can forgive, but if they don't accept, you keep asking. And after the 3rd time, then you give it away. Prayer's up. It's yours, Creator. Daughter you got with, it's yours.
Katja, is that how I pronounce your name?
Mm-hmm.
I think in order to sort of, I think it's important to understand the significance of the massacre and the grander picture of what was going on with Native American relations with white culture. Can you talk a little bit about how common those kinds of events were both locally. I mean, there were massacres up and down the state, not just here, and also nationally. Something like 95% of the native population died, I believe, in between introduction to 1900. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what's important to set context for Humboldt County especially is we are what they call relatively uncontacted peoples until the gold rush. There had been a big movement of the Spanish mission system, the Rancho sort of Mexican War system before this, all the way up through San Francisco. But up here, we were really protected by the Redwood Curtain as Native people, and you get this massive influx. What Jack Norton, who's a Hoopa scholar who wrote Genocide in Northwestern California, what he calls a marauding horde of people. They aren't really here to set up a colony, to do sort of like things where they want to build relationships with people. They really just want gold. They are under the impression that Native people are hiding it, that they're keeping it for themselves, that they're not being honest about it, and so they are doing whatever it takes to get gold. That gold sickness is what determines everything that they're going to do with the peoples that are in this region, and they set up laws and a system to legalize the genocide of Native peoples throughout the state of California. And these laws allowed for the enslavement of Native people, Native children especially. They allowed for people to kill Native people for scalps and heads. They would pay for them. You could there's actually old stories about people in Weaverville remembering people riding through town with heads and scalps like clopping along behind them as they're going to the courthouse to trade them in. And what I always tell students is nobody gets arrested during this period of time. Nobody gets put in jail. Nobody gets put on trial because it's legal to do this. And when we start talking about the law being the moral arbiter of how we do things, we have to remember that in this example, for instance, it was the law that said that this was okay and that there was nothing wrong with it. What you realize in Humboldt County especially is that it really comes down to who's going to be able to manage and own the land. It was about seizure of land. Ultimately, in the end, they kind of realized very quickly that gold is not what's going to make them rich. Land is going to make them rich. And we can't forget that the gold rush wasn't just about gold, but it was also about the complete environmental destruction of this region, the clear cutting of forests, the sort of over-harvesting and over-hunting of animals, the taking of all the salmon to the point that they almost went extinct, and in some streams did, the pouring of mercury into the water so that they could get at gold flakes, which we still deal with today, the sliding of whole villages of people's houses off the sides of mountains into rivers of sediment, the setting on fire of massive amounts of areas where we would gather or go to, the setting on fire of our villages. And I think what I remember as a Native person in this region is driving with my mother across the bridge to get into Eureka, and she would say, "That's Indian Island. They massacred Indian people there. Don't think that this landscape doesn't remember that." And she would always say, our history's written on the land. It remembers us. It wants us to come home. And so she would tell me about this place from the very beginning, about what I needed to know about the things that my people had gone through so that I could remember that out of that strength and the power of our resilience to that came me and the things that I was doing. It's important in Humboldt County to also realize when they tell you these things, they tell you about the enslavement of Native people. We, in our minds, kind of think that that meant that they were enslaving people for labor purposes, that they were sort of trying to get them to labor. We entered the Union. California entered the Union as a no-slave state and then turns around and legalizes the enslavement of California Indians. But when you look at the records in Humboldt County, they're mostly enslaving children, ages 7 to 12, and most of those are girls. And so if you're looking at what's really happening in Humboldt County, they are starting a sex slave industry of young Native American girls and taking them from their families and selling them to people and sending them out of town. And so when we talk about the healing that we have to do as a community, we look at the severs between our children and what happened to the children when they were younger, and what does that mean as we're sort of bringing things back together. I don't think that we should, we shouldn't make extra nice with Humboldt County history. We need people to know what happened, But I always like to say, I don't just want people to tell the story of our history as the story of the attempted genocide against us. I want them to remember that our history is very long and for time immemorial. And if we only talk about that one period of time where where people were trying to destroy us, we forget the amount of periods of time in which we were doing these amazing, beautiful things in this space, but we also forget the resiliency that it took to get through that and be here today, because now we are one of the largest growing populations. We are people who love and laugh. I mean, we're some of the funniest people you're ever gonna meet, Indian people. We laugh so hard. And I always say, like, you wanna hear the dirtiest jokes? You should hang out with like old Indian ladies. Like, they're so funny. And
Cheryl?
I think I don't just want us to just always talk about the genocide and the tragedy. I think that turns us into spectacles. And instead to remember that we are human beings who lived through something, and now we've been able to come out the other side so powerful enough that when we walk into rooms, people stop and they look and they listen. So that to me has been very important.
Thank you. Your point about resistance and resilience, I think, is an important one, and I think that that's where the two film projects sort of intersect. Obviously, Brenda, Central del Pueblo, was kind of transcended fear a little bit coming out of the 2017 ice raids. When we talked about that, you were talking about how there was a lot of fear in the community that speaking out might attract more attention, but in the end it was felt that the need was so great that people wanted to do that anyway, that they overcame their fear. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and what it felt like in 2017 versus now? That's a lot, I know.
Yeah, I think I can learn from this, from what Cheryl and Kacha say about we forgive, but we don't forget, and that applies for us as well. Instead of just being paralyzed for what could be a criminal immigration policy from the federal government, we decided to organize ourselves, and we decided to speak out because we find that we cannot be reduced to a group being traumatized. We find that we have a voice, we have a very important role in this society, in this community, not only because we are the ones in the farms and because we are the ones doing and putting the body in the hard jobs, but also because we are a sort of testimony of what is human nature, which is migration. We decided as a community that we needed to come over from that moment, from the 2017 raids. We decided to don't stay at home isolated for ICE coming Humboldt County, how it's happening. We decided to better talk between us, and we decided to make some reforms that could protect us, which was the Sanctuary Initiative. We decided to really to look after the community for help, to look for strong alliances. We decided to get stronger among us with our culture, with our practices, with our assemblies, with our systems of not only resistance, but of what is important for us, that is tradition, and what is important for us too, to overcome this and be present and be stronger and be a plus in this community. We are bringing richness here, a lot of traditions, as the Dia de los Muertos that we just happened here. It's just a little example of that strength that we are bringing. So looking forward, looking back in the 2017 and how we overcame that moment, I think we are in a very good moment to say thank you, absolutely thank you for coming you all to the ballot and decided to speak out for the migrant community, for saying no, we want to be a sanctuary county, and this is the first sanctuary legislation passed by the people in the ballot in the country. So that make a big sign of who we are, where we are, and what the changes we can keep promoting as immigrants here.
Thank you very much. So Betty, on the far end there, I can kind of see you. Got a long stage here. Let's talk a little bit about your story. You were an immigrant as well. You came here from China. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to live in America and what America meant to you before you came?
Okay, I was homeless at the age of 7 in China, and I separated from my family. I am one of the 12 kids in my family. And age 7, my mom went to jail, and my father escaped to China, to Hong Kong. And then my brother and sisters, we separate. Some go to labor camp, some go to jail. And end up, I was in the one choose to go to labor camp and live in the street. In 4 years, I eat my own ways. I drink my own ways. And I don't know how I survive. The only one thing I feel good about it is my clothes. When the summertime I sweat and the salty taste in my clothes, they keep me whole year to lick in it. And that's the only good taste for me. And also, I witnessed a lot of killing a family member or people I know, my father's friends, or get killed. And finally, I look at myself, age of 10, I said, I had enough, I want to die. I don't want to live anymore. I want to die in my own way because I don't want to sit in a place 24/7, had an angle chain on you and a rope on your neck, and each time when the chain made the noise, they would choke you. And then we walked 1 year every night walking from my village to the border to Hong Kong. And then we had no direction, no food, and no shoes. And we cannot do it in the daytime. Daytime, hidden in a tree. Nighttime, we just smell the people's body odor or a footstep and listen to them to walk. And it would take us the whole year to get in the border. And then I just found out only take a 4-hour train from my village to Hong Kong and take me a whole year. I say, anyway, I came there because I look for my freedom. One way I'm going to die, let it die in my own way. And so I was survive swimming across the tip of China Sea into Hong Kong. I still don't understand how I survived. I don't know. And I was as youngest and survived from China in that culture liberation area, 20 years, 15 years area time. I was the youngest one and pay a lot of attention to the news media. And finally, they found out I'm a child American citizen. So they helped me locate my sister, 2 sisters I never met in San Francisco, brought me to the United States. And America is beautiful. I can breathe. I can go to Safeway, buy chicken. I remember it was like 12 cents a pound of chicken. You know how long ago. And then I can buy an egg. I never eat an egg for many, many years. And such a freedom. And most important to me, no matter what I go, the people smile at me. That is the most powerful healing for my own self. Everybody I met before I come to the United States, they angry at me, they call me names, they spit at me. I get so many injury in my body. The people smile. Smile is the most powerful things. And I would never want to leave this country. I love this country, and I am really lucky. I had an arranged marriage and married my husband. Happened to be a professor. And I am happy myself, never been in school one day in my life. And then we moved to Eureka 47 years ago. And how I can pay back this community. I want to do something for the people who smile at me. I cannot write. I never been to school in my life. I never had formal education. So I found the first family be a homeless, live in a car and outside the Montgomery Ward parking lot. Now it's a Target, and that's how I started. And again, I had such a good life, really. I can go anywhere. I can buy stuff. I don't need a police department approve me go to my next door anymore. And then until I started the outreach for the homeless, I see a lot of anger get back to me. I never see it. Like today, I see about history about Chinese in Eureka. I never knew about until I learned a lot after that. And then people spat at me. They call me names, tell me go back where I belong. And I kind of surprised it still happened this today. I just can't believe it. The people tell me, Betty, I want to talk to you. When I met them, and they spit in my face, get back to where you belong. And I got shot by BB gun a couple of times, too. But I survived. But you know what? I get through so much. Whatever happened to me as a child, like Cheryl say, is I had to let go. I go on my life, and I had a good life here. Whatever happened in the past, let it go. Let it go, let it heal. I still heal it every single day. I left China more than 50 years ago. I still had a lot of healing. Sometimes I don't know. Something happened to me, and then another puzzle in my life. I feel it in my puzzle. And then in 2013, a Chinese president invited me back to China. First time I returned to China, and I did not go to my hometown, and I am not ready for that yet. So, and the government very kind to me and invite me, ask me what I want to do. I say, oh, I need 20 minutes. Let's send me to Great Wall of China. And I want to say a meditation in there, pray for the people, give their life for the freedom. And then out of the blue, they let me go to tenement school. It was tons of people in the school. And, you know, talk about the control by the government. One whistle. Every tourist go back to the school, go back to the tourist bus. I'm the only one in there in the tenement school, and they asked me what I want to do. I walk up the monument. I say a prayer for the people gave their up their life for the freedom, and I'm free. And then that's the most powerful moment for me. That's the powerful for my self-healing. That's what I love America. This is such a beautiful country. All different people make it beautiful. And then everybody had a different opinion, different lifestyle, but I really lived a very good life. I really do. And then I appreciate this country. I appreciate about this. But every year on our memories, in Memory Day in Chinese calendar, I do want to go to downtown, say a prayer for the people in the old time they suffer. And the eviction by illegal government, I do go on there and silent for 10 minutes, just sit in the corner of the street, and I honor these people gave up their life or being abused by a system.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you very much. It's an amazing story, and I think that one thread that I picked up in these conversations with these folks is that there's a certain strain of entitlement that goes along with people who were born and bred in America. And the immigrants that I've spoken with in the course of this project and others, they seem motivated to make their mark here and also to improve the community that they've come to, that they've adopted. And I think that that's invigorating for a national population, and I think it's something we should encourage. Kim Burgell, hi. So you were pretty formative in the effort to get the island back to the Wiyot tribe. Can you talk a little bit how you got involved in that and what your thoughts are on it?
Well, so it actually started quite a long time ago. As you guys know, if you've born and raised here, we go on Madaket in the 3rd grade, and we all have a tour, and we learn about our bay and local history. And during that time, I remember whoever the guy that was driving the boat was talking about the massacre. And I remember being a kid and thinking, who does that? Like, it just wasn't, as a kid, it was just so hard to even believe that that could even happen. And so moving forward, I've always been connected. I'm 4th generation here, and I love it here. But I've always known that there was something missing from here. And that one thing was making things right. And And I didn't realize that till later on in life. But I was out actually on Mattakit again. Cheryl does not remember this. I'm going to give her the picture so she'll remember. But I was running for office, and it was kind of a serendipitous thing because you saw Natalie in the movie, and she had talked to the tribe about, and they'd said they wanted the island back. And I had been out, my husband, former husband, whatever, father of my children, he was driving the boat, and Cheryl was out with a class or something, and we just were briefly talking about it and about giving the island back. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. The thing is that before I ran for council, one of the primary reasons I ran for council was the non-apology letter. That really bothered me a lot. Just the fact that for me, amends means change, and we don't have to worry about the outcome.
Can you explain real quick what the non-apology letter is?
So, it was so awesome to hear Mayor Frank Yeager read that at the event. It was just, Mayor Yeager he has 2 grandchildren that are Wiyot, and he had written this beautiful apology letter to the tribe, and he was bringing it forward to council. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure which, it was released to the Times Standard and to the public before it came to council the next day. So that was a Monday, so that was Tuesday. And I'm kind of a nerd. I used to watch the meetings for 13 years every week because it's just such a good TV show. And so, very interesting to me. So during that event, or during that council meeting, the person that I ran against brought forward this idea, this concern about litigation. And frankly, I was so upset with that. I just could not believe that after all this time that somebody could be worried about us being sued for something so heinous. It was unimaginable. So anyway, that was my impetus, one of my impetuses to run. There were 2 reasons, but that was one of them. And so moving forward, Natalie and I both were elected, and both of us came at it from different directions. She came to Greg, or the city manager, with, this is what I want to do, and I came, and neither one of us really knew that we were both kind of working on it, which was really an awesome thing. So we brought it forward to council, and by the way, they talk about the, the December meeting where it was, voted unanimously. Well, there were actually 3 meetings, maybe 4, 3, where councils had voted unanimously to make this happen. And the first one was when Natalie and I were new in 2015 or 14. So this is something that was really ongoing. Unfortunately, there were things that, there was pushback from certain things that were going on, and that was a problem. But we just persevered and just kept trying to move forward with the process and keep badgering the people that were supposed to be doing what they were doing, until, finally, we were able to get to a place where we are now. We did have many meetings with the tribe, a few meetings with the tribe. And I remember our very first one, it was I just have to tell you guys because it was such a beautiful experience. We went out to the bluff, and we'd brought a gift, and I remember being so nervous about what kind of gift to bring, because of course you don't want to be offensive, right? I mean, oh my gosh, we're trying to do this, and they had the sage burning, and everybody was so kind, and it was just this wonderful. It was just so neat to be able to have that connection. I just felt that connection right away, and I'm just so grateful for that. So we continued to move forward, and again, it took 5 years, which was just, and we weren't supposed to talk about it in public, so it was really a kind of a really hard time to walk through, but we did, and we had trouble with state lands, things like that, some bureaucratic nonsense, not nonsense, but things that we had to walk.
It's okay.
That we had to walk through, excuse me. I'm just me. That we had to walk through to get to the place we are. And I'll tell you, when we found out, the day that we found out that we were actually, it was a done deal, I think best day ever. The actual day of the signing was the best day of my life. It was the best day because we could finally in our community do something right. I mean, we do a lot of right things, but this is huge right. This is an amends with no strings. This is we honor you, we appreciate you, we respect you, And we want you to have this and to be able to move forward with your ceremonies and do these wonderful things that were taken away from you so long ago. And with the exception of my 2 children being born, this has been one of the biggest events of my life, and I'm so grateful that I got to be a small piece in it. When I was in the 3rd grade, I never thought. I mean, who thinks in the 3rd grade that they're going to be able to be a piece of this? So I will forever be grateful, and I hope that as we continue to bridge these relationships, we'll be able to move forward in very healthy ways and honor each other and work together to a better future. And I think our city will change dramatically, because once we make these changes and quit getting stuck in the ugliness, we can move forward, and I love that, so thank you.
Thank you. So all things return to Jerry. He's in both films. So
James?
Yes.
I want to say something.
Okay, sorry, Jerry.
Sorry, Jerry. It only felt like 3 years.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Felt like 15. Are you kidding?
And it was 5 years of labor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. Now that you talk about it, I remember.
Aw, I'm still sending the picture.
You can still send me the picture, but I remember now. I'm getting old. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's great. Jerry, so we are a community, a small place up in the, isolated in the woods in Northern California, yet we were sort of central characters. Eureka generically was a central character in 2 bloody events, or 2 violent events, the expulsion of the Chinese and the massacre on Indian Island and elsewhere. There wasn't just that massacre, it was several that occurred over a couple of days. What does that say about Humboldt County's character? Were we more violent than most places, or were we just somewhere in the middle? Are we just more aware of our history? How do you go there?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think we do have more awareness here than many other places. I think there have been a lot of people that have tried to tell the truth, tried to discover what the truth is, and that's happened here to a better extent than a lot of other locations. But we've also had some signal events that really needed to have the truth be told about them. And other places have experienced that too, but when you look here, we've had a long history of these troubled times, and one of the reasons why that's occurred, I think, and why it occurs other places, is that the truth gets buried, it isn't told, and people don't know what has really happened. When the massacre occurred, the local newspapers would not write about it except a little bit the first day. People up here who knew more about what had happened were afraid to speak out. The only place where they could be heard is if they sent a letter to a newspaper in San Francisco. And when some people did that and explained what had happened up here, their lives were threatened. Some people moved away. So there was a conspiracy among the people who committed the massacres and the people that supported that to never let the truth be told. And I think that time and again we've seen that we cannot move forward unless we've shined the light on the past and illuminates what has happened in the past. And that's not to say that you stay back there, that you worry about it, that you feel vindictive, that you focus on it entirely. But I think until you know what has happened, until that illumination has occurred, you are not going to have a clear pathway as you move forward. And so, you know, when I write about some of this, that's my goal, is to at least once make sure that the truth has been told about these events, and then hopefully we can move forward after that.
Yeah. I've heard rumors that there were families that were involved with the massacre that for years and years kept it, do their best to keep their family's involvement secret. Is that true?
Yes, it is. There are people who have complained to me when I have mentioned unsavory episodes in their family members' lives, not necessarily just the massacre, but other events like that. There are many families that have been here for generations, white families that maybe came here in the 1850s. And some of those families have been very successful, and part of their success has often been because they took advantage of the native people that were here, because they participated in some of these events. And yet, because very little of that has ever been told, they can claim an honorable life for their forebears. And for whatever it's worth to them, they can feel good about themselves because they had a grandfather or a great-grandfather who became wealthy here.
Yeah.
And once the word is out about how they gained that wealth, then these people become very upset.
We pollute their mythology with the truth, right? And
Yeah.
so they don't want to hear that or understand it. Has that changed over time? I mean, are families becoming more and more open to that, or is it as tight as it ever was?
I can't really say. I've only been here 40 years, and so I'm still kind of a newcomer. But I've had people recently say that, how dare Jerry Rhodey write about my family? He's not one of us. And this is the attitude that's still here for some of these people, that if you aren't one of them, you don't have the right to speak about these sort of things. And if you're one of them, you want to keep the truth hidden.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing the work you do.
Yeah.
Katja, you had said something at the ceremony that struck me when the island was returned, and it was at the Adorney Center, and you had said, just give the land back. And you were talking about what people can do, I think, to, I'm not going to say this right, but what people can do to sort of make good on the crimes of history or whatever. It's like, yeah, you can offer, kind words or solace, but in the end, it's all about the concrete things that you can do to make good for it. So give the land back. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not. But basically, my question is, what do you see as an equitable outcome for Native people in the future? Often when you talk about Native communities, you're talking about the past. And again, you mentioned that here. You're talking about the crimes that have happened in the past, but not the future. What does a good future look like from this point forward for Native communities, given all that's occurred and the trajectories we're currently on?
I truly believe that from the moment that colonization started, Native people started with decolonization. We sort of saw what we were up against and went, okay, now what do we got to do to carry forward into a future? We were always thinking about the future. Lots of people wanted to put us in the past and think that we were they thought of us as people that were on their way out. They were sort of like, much like the dinosaurs, Native people are going extinct. But we never thought that. We think for 7 generations. And what you see in history is that our ancestors were like, we have to hold on to every little piece of something that we can carry forward because the next 7 generations are going to need this for when they're going to come back. And what I love is that those pieces are finding us now all of the time. When we revitalize our ceremonies, we find songs that people left behind in the archives. There's actually a woman recorded in one archive where she's like, I'm going to sing this song to you, to this ethnographer. And she's all, because someday somebody's going to find it and they're going to sing it again in a ceremony. And we do today. So I know that they were thinking about the future. You were forward, future-thinking people. That's what we always wanted to think about, is like what was going to happen. And for me, the future is only what we can radically imagine it to be. And so I do these talks about radical imagination all the time. And what I say is like, I went to this talk by this woman. She did this great talk, and she said, people have an easier time of imagining what they're going to do in a zombie apocalypse than they do imagining beyond capitalism. Because we've never been taught how to do that. We don't, like in 6th through the 12th grade, we don't read books about what it looks like beyond settler colonialism, beyond this system that we're in right now. So we think it's not possible. But anything is possible. I feel like indigenous peoples believe, what we believe is that you story things into being. Nothing can be until you say it out loud. That's how you put it out there so that it can become. And that's how anything's invented. You're sitting with your friends, and you're like, you know what we really need is like a place where we can post pictures of our food, and then people like it, and then we know who likes our food. And when you say it for the first time, you're like, that's weird and crazy. Nobody's gonna do that. And now that's all we do. So you story into being what the future can be, which is why I say we just have to start saying things out loud. Things that we might think like aren't going to be possible or to happen, we just say them. So that's what I do. I go into spaces, and then people say, what can I do? And I say, you can give the land back. And they're like, all of it? I'm like, every single piece of it. And then they're like, what does that look like? And I was like, it looks like 2 or 3 weeks ago when Eureka City returned Tuluwat. I wish it was like out of the realm of our imaginations, but nobody has an excuse anymore because we know what it looks like and we know it's possible. And so then they come and they're like, what do I do with all my baskets? And I'm like, give it back. And they're like, what do I do with all the things in the museums? I'm like, give it back. I think we're starting on this trajectory of like these amazing things that can just be because we say them out loud. And if you want like the nitty gritty of how that works, I know that takes time. I know it's not gonna happen instantaneously, but what I loved about what happened with Tuluwat is it reminded me that like over a decade ago, Cheryl signed on and she was like, I'm gonna get this island back. And I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how many bake sales I have to hold or how many t-shirts I gotta sell. I'm gonna get this island back. She storied into being what we're living today. So I know it's possible. If you're ready to give land back, you can visit with me and Cheryl after this.
So, Jerry, coming back to you again, my question is kind of a forward-thinking one again. But basically, times and contexts change over the years, and what kind of behaviors do you see that we are doing now that we might look back on in 100 years and think that's an atrocity that we didn't see coming or that we didn't anticipate?
Well, that's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think of what's going on in Humboldt County today. Mm-hmm. I think it's an incredible time of healing. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very positive time when we look at the way people have come together here, the fact that we have this meeting here tonight, the fact that we have the city council that we do here in Eureka, that we have people who are so willing to come together to do things. And we sure have a long list of problems. And a lot of them are not the kind of problems we had in the past. We're looking at things like sea level rise that are going to threaten the entire North Coast in the near future. And boy, let me tell you, I am really glad that we have the people we have in office right now who are going to have to play a leading role in dealing with problems like that. So here locally, where I think so much can be done, I'm very optimistic about the future. I don't see the kinds of things coming that would be ranked as disasters or as great problems like those ones we've been talking about tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kim, the city has become sort of an example to a lot of communities, I think. In the Get the Land Back effort, I think that there's not been many communities that have stepped forward and done something proactive. You mentioned some of the media coverage that has been coming at the city. The Times covered it, BBC covered it. There's some other big entities that are going to cover it who I'm not going to reveal tonight, but if you want to know, ask him. So how important is that for the city to set that kind of example? And have you heard from anybody else who's thinking about doing the same kinds of things?
So it's kind of both and, because I feel like even if there was no national press, nothing, we did the right thing, and I'm very grateful and proud of that. However, both and, I think that we have an opportunity as our city to really make an impact, a positive impact in our nation with people that want to have these things happen. Back in February, Councilmember Arroyo, Chairman Ted Hernandez, and I went. I was in Washington, D.C., and they Skyped in to the National League of Cities, to a racial equity group, and we were able to talk, and Cheryl came. She was a cameo in the Skype. But we were able to talk about what we were doing, what our processes were, sort of what our processes were, because at the time we were still unable to really talk about some of that stuff. But they're very interested in being able to bring this forward to other places. And they're actually invited, can I say?
Yeah.
They invited Cheryl out to their convention in San Antonio to tell her story, which is amazing because you know that that's going to have a huge impact on communities all around. So I believe that I'm so thankful for where we live and our community that really supports these kind of healthy decisions. And I really feel like we're going to be able to be a stepping stone for other places to incrementally make those changes and to realize that it all begins with finding something similar, something you can agree on and building from there. You know, it doesn't have to be way up here right away. You've got to start building those relationships, and that takes time. But I think that in the long term, this could really be a benefit and a healing thing for a lot of people.
Can I make
Please.
a comment on
Yes, you
first? I was on the telephone today with somebody who's doing this conference, and she was talking with somebody from that conference back in February, and she wasn't impressed with Ted or I.
Huh.
And this is what happens when you walk into the tribal office, minding my own business, and they said, Cheryl, sit down. They're Skyping you in. Where? I don't know. But in that, this individual who is either on city council or county or something, she wasn't impressed with, she said it doesn't make any difference to her. They have no Indians in their community and things like that. But she thought about it. It took her February, March, April, May, June, 5 months. She wrote something for her city to acknowledge the Native Americans that were there before they got there.
It's awesome.
So we do live in a bad time, but we also live in a fabulous county. We've had bad things happen here. I've seen Indian men killed, and I've had white people be ugly to me, and I got ugly back because they asked me who it was, and I said, all white people look alike. Oh, my mother would have slapped me upside my head because that's not how I was brought up. And I apologize. I'm sorry that just fell out of my mouth. And, you know, those kind of things do fall out of our mouth. But I am so grateful to have you. I see the Larsons there, the Pike Nicely's over there, people that have been a part of my life for decades. And they have been by our sides when we started working earnestly to raise the $106,000 to buy the dilapidated, ugly piece of land that was so contaminated. But they saw a vision along with mine and my family's vision and other friends. And those kind of things is that it wasn't just one person. It was an idea that started back in the 70s that got shot down, started back in the early 90s, got shot down, but it takes us all. It took the whole Humboldt County community to come together. Granted, there were some people who were not liking it. And I just look at them and say, I still like you. And you just keep going. I tell young people today, when I talk to young people, whether they're high school or college students, I tell them to be bold. Be bold. Talk from your heart. Get your ducks in order. I said, but don't be belligerent, because they're not going to listen to you. Be kind. Be thoughtful. And get those people in that inner circle, that inner core, so that you can let off steam, so that when you come out, you've got your ducks in order, and then you can go forward. So it can help. It can happen, even in the society that we're living in throughout the United States, about immigration, about all these different ugliness, is that Betty said, smile. That's what she likes. And smile. I saw one of my antagonists the other day, and I walked into the tribal office and I just said, hi, everybody. And he looked at me and he smiled at me. It was the first smile I ever got out of that man. And just smile. Kind words. But when you have to stomp your foot, stay steadfast, that's what you've got to do. I called up Peter LaValle. I never knew who he was. I just called him. Bold statement. I want the island back. He said, we'll work on it. 12 months later, we got 40 plus acres back. Got back on council. And Natalie says, what do you want? I want the island back. Kim said, we're going to expedite this. 5 years later. That was pretty fast. That was pretty fast. But, you know, like Ted said, everything happens in its time. And so that's what we kind of continue. Sometimes it's like batting our head against a brick wall. As long as it doesn't leave any marks on your forehead. But you keep going.
I want to take a second here. We're going to open it up to the audience. We have a microphone over there, and if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment, you're welcome to. Please keep it short. There's a lot of people here. We don't have that much time left, but I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience who has anything to say or any question to ask.
I had a question for Cheryl or for Kim about Rob Arkley, who was one of the vocal opponents of the return to the island, and did he ever change his opinion on that? I was hoping at the signing ceremony a week or two ago that he was going to show up and apologize, but I don't think he did. So did he ever change his mind?
I don't know. I have no dealings with the gentleman.
I haven't heard anything from him either.
Anyone else? Please, there we go. Got a couple over here. She's coming with the mic. She's back there. This is Katie Whitehouse. Whiteside, I'm sorry.
I had a question for Jerry. We've been doing some work on the old Myrtle Grove Cemetery, which is one of the original cemeteries here in Eureka. And part of their honoring is the veterans, and one of the veterans things that's getting acknowledged for military service is the Mounted Mountaineers. And I've been trying to understand and wrap my head around that. And when you talked about the Hydesville Cavalry, I was just wondering if there was any link to that, or if you could speak to that.
Well, yeah. During the time of the greatest conflict here in Humboldt County in the 1850s and the early 1860s, there was the United States Army, and they were at Fort Humboldt and these other locations around here. And sometimes, at least, they tried to keep the peace, and sometimes they actually tried to protect Indians. But Other times they went out and fought against the Indians, so their record is really mixed. But then when the Civil War started, all of the regular soldiers in the regular army went east to fight, and the state militia was started, and they became the military force for the government up here in Humboldt County. And many of those militia people desperately wanted to kill Indians, and they wanted to get paid for it. And so the record of those groups is just terrible. These were people who were bent on genocide for the most part. And not to say that everyone in a volunteer group like that did it, but sooner or later, almost all of those militia units participated in massacres. So there's a real distinction that you can make there, I think. And when you start talking about the mountaineers, you're talking about one of the militia units. You're talking about a group that did go out and commit massacres. And when you have a grave, someone like that, next to maybe a Civil War veteran's grave, somebody that fought for the Union Army back east, that's a very different situation. Those people did very different things, and to lump them all together and say that you're going to honor all of those people, to me, does not ring true. It's not justified based on the history.
Excellent. Did you have a question as well? She has a mic. Let her get around to you. Red scarf.
Question that can be answered, but when you were talking about a lot of the families that obtained their wealth through a lot of the behavior of their ancestors, I wonder if some of that not wanting it to be known is fear that what they have now might be taken from them because it was obtained in a way that wasn't very honorable, or if they're ashamed. I just, wonder what they're thinking when you brought that to light.
Yes.
I think one of the things I have pointed out to people before is everybody needs to do a deep soul searching about how their families, especially if they're calling them sort of like the original pioneers of Humboldt County, are going to very much be tied to at least the illegal seizure of land from indigenous peoples that was only opened because of massacres or removal. And contending with that, knowing that, I always tell students, if your parents came to you and said, you're going to inherit our family house, and the way we got that was we killed the family that lived here before, and so now you're going to get it, but you need to know the history of it. Do you live in the murder house? Are you really cool with it? Like, great, I'll live in this house where we killed the entire family to live here before we got here. And I think at a point, if you're reconciling that, I think you should people need to just step up and say, no, I don't want to participate in that. It's not that I'm going to hide it because that's not going to make you feel better. Everybody feels that. Like, everybody knows that that's how it happens. So this is why the return of land, the return of things, is the only real way to move forward. And I would ask people, the self-reflecting that you do feels scary, but I think in the end, we all have a responsibility to kind of think about the ways in which we're here in these spaces and why.
This is probably more a question about Native acceptance as opposed to land. But I've been told that in the Blue Lake area in the old days, there were some very good Native baseball players that were never allowed to play in the leagues up here, or did they have their own league, or does anybody have a comment on that?
Excuse me, my father was a sidearm pitcher and was scouted for the major leagues back in the 30s. Well, actually, late 30s, because he already was married and had a family. But Dad played in the Merchant League here, played against the Humboldt Crabs. At one time, we thought he was a player for Humboldt Crab, but I can't think of what's his name, was coach for a long time for the Crabs. And I got in touch with him, and he says, no, your father just played against us, and we always lost. Dad was one of those players that there were a lot of good players up here, good ball players, baseball, and And there used to be another league later when he was much older, and it was called the Redwood League. And, you know, my uncle played, my brother played, cousins played. It was always good to go out and watch the guys play ball. And so, you know, Dad was accepted by everybody because he liked everybody. And there was no division of color with my father. And the same with my mom. Everybody was welcome. And so he was welcomed in a lot of places. I can't talk for anybody else.
Any more questions?
This is more of a statement than a question. I was born, educated here in Humboldt County. And through the victors write the history, I really did not know what happened. About 30 years ago, I was working with a member of the Native American tribe, one of them around here. I don't know what his tribe was. I can't remember his last name. His first name was Woody. Social services at the time. And he was telling me some of the history of how the Indians around here were treated. And it was a shock. And when I see what the city of Eureka has done with the tribe, the Indians, we cannot make up for what our ancestors did. We cannot change the history. What we need to do is what you have been doing and Jerry does, and that is to bring the truth to light. Because until we bring that truth to light and we let the victors write the history, we will continue to make the same mistakes throughout history. There will be no change, no going forward. No being able to say, I'm sorry for what I said, I'm sorry for what I did, and have it accepted. There's no way that somebody's going to be able to say, I forgive you, until we have the truth. We accept the truth and decide to change our way of life so the truth continues to guide us.
Is it on? Hi. First, I'd like to thank Jerry. I'm very happy to be here. I've seen him on the Access channels, but never met him before. And this whole subject, oh, 1, 2, 3. This whole subject has recently impacted my life, really for the last 4 years. I live in Hydesville. I live on land that was part of a much bigger holding that Seamus Wright held. Seamus Wright was one of the actual leaders of the massacre. I'm curious at the end of all this stuff, a lot of what Kim and James and Jerry can't talk about, which I think will become evident to the town very shortly, about what the backstory about Mr. Arkley and all that stuff, which I know a lot about, but I cannot talk about, but I will be able to talk about very shortly. But this subject of Indian land rights and everything comes at me from a different angle than a lot of other people, although I know that there's a lot of Easterners here. I've lived in Humboldt for 40 years, 35 in Hydesville. I know the county from the south to Arcata, travel back and forth. Hydesville's a good commute, you know, it's pretty quick to get up here, 101. But the backstory is not just prejudice against Native Americans. when I lived back east, I've had blue-collar jobs my whole life. And when I lived back east, I came out here, and my probably best opportunity was that I had some millwright skills. And I worked in the Bay Area and lived in San Francisco for 7 or 8 years and worked at Chevron, and among other jobs. And coming from Pennsylvania to San Francisco with a blue-collar job, it was immediate improvement. I made about $10 to $15 more an hour, great benefits, life was cheery. I had unemployment from Pennsylvania, and there was no change I was still in the United States. But when I came to Humboldt County, and I had come out of the Vietnam era, I was a vet, not Vietnam, Korea, 66, 68. It was like going back 30 years. I never saw a place. I had a lot of skills. I worked at cabinet shops, but when I went to work at Eel River Sawmill, I came home, it was hard to find jobs here, very hard. And I came home and I said, this is like the 20s in the films where you have people having fights on the green chain, everybody's drugged out, methamphetamines, and one day somebody gets fired and he's in jail. 2 weeks later, he's hired again because there's not enough guys. It's first, you're not from here. You're not from here. I wound up being the manager operator of the Hydesville Water District. And in my 74 years, I never went to a public place and called out people by name. But I have been at these planning commission and at the supervisors meetings. And I've called them out by name, and not one of them has come forward. And this town is going to find out this prejudice that's in Hydesville specifically and other areas didn't go away. These people, and I use that term hesitatingly because I've been at meetings in the Hydesville Water District where people will defend the most ridiculous thing. They'll want you to believe the false.
I think we're getting a little bit off topic here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had to say. I'm sorry for ranting, but Mr. Davis, the grandson of E.L. Davis, I worked for him for 8 years, and I know what this is all about.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Last call. No, well, I want to thank you guys for coming. I think this worked out really well. Before everyone flies to the doors, surveys, did we get them all filled out? Katie, are we okay on surveys? Or we need to collect surveys that we haven't collected. And there's going to be another town hall style meeting on the 5th, I believe, with concerning addicts among us. That will be at the Orphanger building. So if anybody can make it to that, we'll have more information on that coming up. And applaud these fine people because they really made our evening special tonight. Thank you.
Morir sería si algún